Hello guys, welcome to another video of Microsoft Azure. In this video, we are going to set up Azure Monitor Private Link scope, that is also called AMPLS in short. We will set up this and see how we can connect monitoring resources such as app insights, log analytics to AMPLS and monitor our traffic or connect our monitoring resources privately using the AMPLS. Okay, this is a important service, or you can say the resource in Azure Monitor. You can connect your application insights, you can connect your log analytic workspaces, and even data collection endpoint as well as data collection rules. Okay, all the traffic related to your monitoring will be going via this Azure Monitor Private Link scopes. If you see the definition here, use Azure Monitor Private Link scopes to privately connect your service to your application insights component or log analytics workspace. If you open the documentation, here you can see the definition as well. With Azure Private Link, you can securely link Azure Platform as a Service resources to your virtual network by using private endpoints. Okay, here you can see some of the advantages. You connect privately to Azure Monitor and all these things, and this is the architecture diagram of how AMPLS works in Azure. Okay, so this will be your virtual network and your AMPLS will be created inside that, and there will be a private endpoint mapped or created for this AMPLS resource, and all the monitoring specific resources such as uh, application insights, log analytics, DC, all will be connected with this AMPLS. Okay, so that all the monitoring resources will have to connect privately with this AMPLS. Of course, you will have to create NSG rules and you will have to enable firewall request if you have disabled them in your NSG or network security groups. Okay, so now let's go to Azure portal and try to create one AMPLS resource. This is just a simple resource. The main component of, you can say, AMPLS is the private endpoint. So now let me create AMPLS first and later we'll focus on its private endpoint. Okay. Here let me create a resource group, that is AMPLS-01. Select the region, whatever your region should be based on your requirement, and let me select the resource as well. This is my resource. Okay, and here you will have to select query access mode and indentation access mode. You can keep this as open or private only. If you need more details, just click on this button just beside this. You can see the query access mode controls whether query requests from connected networks can reach all resources or only resources connected to this AMPLS. Okay, so generally once you create the AMPLS, you will have to link some of the resources inside this. If you keep private only those resources which are linked with this AMPLS will be able to communicate this AMPLS directly. Others won't be able to do it. Okay. Same applies to ingestion access mode as well. The ingestion access mode controls whether ingestion requests from connected networks can reach all resources or any resources connected to this AMPLS. Okay, so let's keep the default for now open. If you need more details about them, you can read this as well. Okay, now click on next. You can add tags if you have a requirement to do so. Let me now click on review plus create. If you have to automate it, you can always download the template for automation and use this template to automate your AMPLS creation via YSAP or ARM templates using some pipelines or uh, from your local machine. Okay, let me click on create. So this will create one AMPLS resource. Once this is created, we will have to link our application insights or maybe data collection endpoints, or you can have some of the resources such as log analytics workspaces. You will have to link them inside this AMPLS. Okay, this has been created. If you expand the deployment details, you can see the resource has been created. Let me click on go to resource. Okay, so this is my AMPLS. You can see all the resources here. If you have to provide access controls, you'll have to see activity log. You can refer these two options here. And here in configure, you can add private endpoint connections. If you click on it, here you will have to create a private endpoint. Okay, so I would like to highlight one thing. You can create only one AMPLS for a virtual network. Okay, you cannot create more than one AMPLS. You can create the AMPLS resource, but this private endpoint I'm talking about, if you have created one private endpoint for one AMPLS inside your virtual network, you cannot create another one. If you are trying to create, this will throw an error. If you have a requirement to do so, you can create a separate or different virtual network and you can create the private endpoint in that. Okay, so we'll create the private endpoint, but before that, let's see these options. What are these? Here you can create the private endpoint, and here you can add the Azure Monitor resources. So the resources which you want to connect this AMPLS, you will have to add it here. This can be your application insight, or this can be your data collection endpoint, as well as your application insight. Okay, you will have to add them here, then only they will be able to communicate with this AMPLS privately, otherwise they will not be able to do so. Okay, now let's go to properties, and you can see all the properties related to this. You can change the access mode here, which we had seen while creating the AMPLS resource. If you have to change it to private only, you can always change it. You can add logs, you can export the template to automate it. Now let's go to private endpoints and try to create one private endpoint for your AMPLS. Okay, so at this moment, this is just the AMPLS resource with no private endpoint. And if you try to use it, this is not going to work because we don't have any private endpoint inside this AMPLS. Let me click on this plus sign and create a private endpoint. Let the resource group be same. So if you are creating a private endpoint, you will have to provide the name, and here you will have to provide the network interface name. This network interface name will be connected to your private endpoint, and all the traffic will be going via this NIC. Select the region. Now click on resource. Okay, so here you will have to select the resource. Okay, select the resource type. This should be monitor. Let me check if we have this resource here. No resource found. Let me just quickly get the resource ID for this, and we'll create the private endpoint with the resource ID. Copy it. Actually, we should have got the things filled earlier, but not sure why we are not getting that field. Okay, this is my network interface name. Click on resource. Okay, here in the resource type, you will have to select Microsoft.insights and slash private link scopes. Once you have selected it, you will have to select your resource inside this. So this is my resource, and the target sub resource will be Azure Monitor, which will be filled automatically. Now let's click on next. Here you will have to select the virtual network. Okay, you will have to create a virtual network here, and you will have to attach one subnet within it. So let me quickly create a virtual network. Since we are not getting the option to create it from here, let me open a duplicate tab and set up a virtual network. Let's go to the virtual network, create it. Let everything be the default. Next. Okay, so I have created my virtual network. This is vn-01 and it is inside this resource group. Okay, after that you will have to create the subnet where this AMPLS private endpoint will be created, and the private endpoint will be part of this subnet. So whenever you raise some NSG request or you create some any request or route table for this subnet, you will have to create correct NSG rules for the resources to reach your private endpoint and AMPLS. Okay. Private IP configuration, you can select dynamically allocate IP address or statically if you have the IPs, but let's select it dynamically. And if you want to attach an application security group, you can do that as well, but for now let's keep the default and click on next, which is DNS. Okay, here you will have to set a private DNS integration. Basically you will have to create 5 DNS zones, and you will have to attach those 5 DNS zones with your AMPLS and private endpoint, so that required DNS records will be created inside them and your AMPLS will be working smoothly. Okay, to connect privately with your private endpoint, you need a DNS record. We recommend that you integrate your private endpoints with a private DNS zone. You can also utilize your own DNS servers or create DNS records using the host file on your virtual machine. Okay, so for a AMPLS, you should have minimum of 5 DNS zones with this name. Okay, so this should be your private DNS zone name: privatelink.monitor.azure.com, privatelink-oms, opinsight.com, ods opinsight.com, privatelink.agentsbc.azure automation, privatelink.blob.co.windows.net. Okay, so this is for Azure Monitor, and these all are for application insight log analytics. This agent SBC is the one for data collection endpoints and data collection rules. So this will help you to install Azure Monitor Linux agents in the virtual machines to collect the logs and uh, place the logs or push the logs to application the log analytics workspace table. Okay. So now we have added these 5 DNS zones. If you have already created these DNS zones, you can select the existing one, or this resource will create one separate private DNS zone by default. Now click on tags and review plus create. Okay. If you have to download the template for automation, you can download it. This private endpoint is quite different from the existing private endpoints which we have created, where you have just added one private endpoint, and that was just for that resource, and only one DNS entry was being created. But in this case, there are 5 DNS zones, one private endpoint, and all the DNS record related with the private endpoint will be created inside that. I will show you one by one, I mean all the private DNS zones. So this deployment will create first 5 DNS zones, then it will create your private endpoint network interface. After that, it will create the DNS entries as well inside that private DNS zones. Okay, so it will take some time, not some time, but it will take around a minute. First, it has created the private endpoint. Now it is creating the DNS as well. Once these are all created, we'll see and check the private endpoint, and we'll check all the private DNS zones as well. Okay, so the private endpoint has been created. You can see the private endpoint, private DNS zone, virtual network links, and other things have been created. Now let me click on go to resource. So this will take me to the private endpoint of AMPLS. If you see in the overview tab, here we have the resource group, subscription, virtual network, and subnet, where this private endpoint is created, the network interface, and the private link resource. So this is connected with AMPLS1, which is my AMPLS name as well, and target sub resource is Azure Monitor. Okay, now click on setting. Here you can see the application security groups if you have created, and here you will see the DNS configuration. Okay, the DNS configuration is the main thing inside of our private endpoint. You will see all the DNS related entries, your network interface, and all the private DNS zones which are linked with this private endpoint. Okay, so if you scroll down, this is my network interface, and all these IP addresses and FQDNs are created and linked to this network interface, as well as my private DNS zones. So see, this is the IP address. Generally it will allocate so many IPs, and it will create DNS entries for them inside the private DNS zones. Okay, so this has created api.monitor.azure.com and other things as well, like live.monitor.azure.com. With this only, it will AMPLS will communicate with all the resources privately. Okay, with this DNS entry only, you will have all the DNS records. And if you scroll down, here you will see the configuration name, FQDN, IP addresses, and the private DNS zone name. You can see this DNS zone has been created, and all these records are automatically created and linked to this private DNS zone. Other 4 DNS zone are also linked. You can see private link -oms, op insight -azure-com, something like this, and others as well, like ODS, agent SBC, and this blob.core.windows.net. So these are some of the private DNS zones which are created and automatically linked with my private endpoint DNS configuration. With using this DNS only, our Azure resources will communicate with the AMPLS privately. Agent SBC is for the agents. ODS, OMS, these are for application insights, and even the monitor.azure.com, this is for application insights and log analytics workspace. And the last one is for the storage account. So if you open any of the private DNS zone, it will show you all the DNS records. You can see the 8 DNS records are created. Virtual network link is one. If you expand the setting and DNS management, you'll see all the record sets here. Okay, like see API, and it is pointing to this IP address and other DNS records as well, and they are they have been allocated a dynamic IP address. Okay, and finally this is the virtual network link. With this virtual network link, our virtual network has been connected with this private DNS zone, and this private DNS zone will resolve inside this virtual network. That's why we will have to link the virtual network with the private DNS zones. So we have covered how we can set up the private endpoints for AMPLS and how we can link all these 5 DNS zones, and how we have seen how the DNS records will be created automatically by default. Okay, we have also set up the AMPLS, and we have seen all the properties of it, like like see the private endpoint connection, how we can link our Azure Monitor resources with the AMPLS. Okay, so that's it, the video from AMPLS. If you have any suggestions or questions, please let me know in the comments. If you like this video, please like and subscribe my channel. Thanks for watching.